WWE is returning to TV 14 this upcoming Monday.
Awesome.
July the 18th, 2022. This upcoming Monday Night Raw will be TV 14, the first since the last TV 14 Monday Night Raw, which was 14 years to the day of this recording, July 14th,
That's fate, I'm telling you.
2008. So pretty much the first TV 14 and the last TV 14, the same month. They love to do it around summertime.
Yeah, you know what? I'll say this because they announced it earlier today, is what I saw. So it had to be done by design, don't you think? That's such a strange coincidence that it's July 14th of all days. So maybe this was already in the, obviously it was in the works, but don't you think they maybe were waiting to unveil this on July 14th? It's very interesting.
So there's a lot to unpack about WWE now being TV 14 because it has been 14 years and a lot has changed in 14 years. And I believe in Jim Ross, something he said back when he was working for WWE many, many years ago. Because remember, they have been TV PG now on Monday Night Raw for 14 years. And one thing he said is that the ratings don't essentially equate to good writing. And another aspect of this being TV 14 is, I use the South Park analogy. South Park is a really good example of this because if you ever watch South Park nowadays, if you ever happen to run into it, and it's on Comedy Central sometimes in reruns at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if you were to go back to the early 2000s, you wouldn't be finding South Park on in the early afternoons while you're at the gym on free TV. You wouldn't also be seeing it TV 14 itself. It was TVMA. It was designated to air only after 10 o'clock. It was something that was for the mature audiences only. So what I'm trying to get at is essentially that in my eyes, really, TV 14 today is of the past, is essentially the new TV PG of today. I know AEW Dynamite's been TV 14 this whole time, but I just want to get your, Brandon, your vision on what do you really expect TV 14 to mean when you turn on Monday Night Raw this week?
I think you're going to see, it's going to be more edgy. And that's the first thing. You're going to see, I know they've been kind of brushing it, especially with Riddle and the, back even a few months ago with RK Bro, where they would make those, they were beating around the bush about marijuana, things like that. But I think they're going to come out and be full blown about it. You're going to see, it's not going to be innuendos anymore. It's going to be right to it. You're going to see more, you're going to hear more swear words. And unfortunately, there are some people out there that are thinking, are we going to have the word puppies back in the, on the airwaves? Are we going to have those type of matches, which I hope they don't go in that direction? But I mean, no. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, but I would say it's just going to be more edgy. You're going to see, you're going to hear certain words that, weren't on the program in the last 14 years. You're going to see that. I think, I don't know what they're going to do with the whole blood policy. Maybe they change that again. Maybe they're going to, maybe that's being updated as we speak, or it's already been implemented with the TV 14, where you're going to see blood for the, because I know there's a no blood policy.
And it's kind of strange to think because this is essentially a very big jump if they utilized it, meaning I don't think they're going to utilize it. The whole thing of you talking about puppies, I think that kind of brings us to the whole crux of this talk here is that, the Attitude Era isn't returning. That was a separate thing. And even essentially after the Attitude Era, when they were still TV 14, the product didn't seem much different when it comes to edginess that it does right now. The reason, we know that it was July 14, 2008 is because I brought this up just to see some of the matches and there wasn't really like a big changeover from one week to the next. When it went from TV 14 to TV PG, it was more or less in the corner rating more than it was in the program itself. I mean, you still had the same cast of characters, you still had some of the same similar Beth Phoenix and Santina Morella.
Cody Rhodes is on that show.
I mean, Cody Rhodes, we'll talk about that in just a second, about obviously, the coincidences. It's crazy to think that he's been in WWE or essentially involved in WWE that long. I know, obviously, with the break in between, but still, it's crazy to think that 2018.
Shad was on there.
Kofi Kingston, obviously, but yeah, I mean the Kofi Kingston beating Paul Burchill.
That's a name I haven't heard in a while. And Katie Lee,
those kind of things. The main event was Crime Time and John Cena versus Cody Rhodes, JBL, and Ted DiBiase. I'm gonna assume that means Junior. But
I assume that's the case. Yes.
But I feel like really what difference from this time, like I said, from from 1 week where it was TV 14 to TV PG, what kind of differences did we see? I'm very surprised that WWE is going to TV 14 just because kind of what I mentioned a minute ago is how things are much different. And essentially TV PG in 2022 is the equivalent of what TV 14 probably was back in 2005, 2006. So the things that they want to do, they're not really being held back. I remember early on in like the 90s, The Simpsons, if you remember, was considered edgy when we were growing up in the 90s. And nowadays it's very tame. So with the current landscape we live in, to be honest with you, TVPG could probably have a lot of the same Attitude Era segments under today's landscape. So they could, with TV 14 being what it is, could probably go even further because now as I said, South Park is TV 14, used to be TVMA. So if they were to go to TV 14 in that direction, they could essentially be what was the old TVMA, but I don't think they'll go any of those directions.
No, here's the thing.
I don't think we're going to see any degrading of women. I definitely don't think we're going to see any of that.
I don't think so either. And the other thing I want to add to that is, what about the kids? I know WWE's always catered to the kids, especially at live events. I mean, TV PG, they were trying to, go towards the kids. They wanted to get a younger audience, so to speak. So how does that going to affect things with the TV 14 versus TV PG?
Well, if you remember back when WWE started to get edgier and they started to do the TV 14 stuff in the Attitude Era, one thing that they hung their hat on was the fact that there was differences between some of the shows, meaning that Monday Night Raw was TV 14 or that's why it started after 9 o'clock, which makes it a little interesting because it's starting 8 o'clock nowadays. It doesn't have that later in the night kind of excuse like they had.
Yep.
And I want to even say when they moved to TV 14, the first hour of Raw was TV PG and then the War Zone was TV 14 at first. But SmackDown, that was TV 14 originally during its debut years, but then moved to TV PG, I think, very early on. I want to say by the year 2001, SmackDown was TV PG. So I think that's probably going to continue to be TV PG. Obviously, the shows on the weekends that none of us adults watch, the recap shows, those kind of things can still be TV PG. But I guess my thing is, I don't foresee a big change. And more importantly, I agree with what Jim Ross said many years ago, how I led this off, is good writing trumps all of this.
Yeah, if it's good writing, it doesn't have to have vulgarities. You could just have good content. So I agree with Jim Ross with that. Now I do want to put another piece to it with the kids in mind. Does this mean TV 14? And you alluded to it. I mean, it's a 2-hour show back in the day for Raw. Now it's a 3-hour show. Is there a possibility where they go 1 or 2 hours and then they wait till 10 o'clock to say this is our TV 14 hour? Could they?
Maybe what you're saying about 3 years ago, and it's crazy to think it was 3 years ago, but that little thing they tried out for a minute that died, was that a test run for the TV 14, the Raw After Dark? Remember the third hour that happened? That was all of about 2 weeks. I think it was all of about 2 weeks in which they changed up the set, meaning I went to a Monday Night Raw.
And they dimmed the lights too.
They dimmed the lights, and then it was it after that they started to do the whole Shane McMahon thing?
Oh yeah, the street fighting stuff.
Was that also considered Raw After Dark? I think, or something like that.
I think it was
Raw Underground. Raw Underground.
Yep.
So and then they kind of ditched it. So it would. I wonder, if the best solution to this and maybe to change that may make the final hour. I think that'd probably be the best way to go, because then you only really have to do TV 14 writing, focus on 1 hour of the show.
Yeah, you can make it very, more teen oriented, adult oriented. The only thing I wonder is, a lot of time the big stuff happens right at 8 o'clock on Monday Night Raw. So
yeah, I think during this initial, I agree that the last hour would be good, but I think during this initial, they're going to go TV 14 right from the get-go through the whole show.
You think for a full 3 hours, yeah.
And, it kind of reminds me of, I don't even know, and you watch Raw, and I watch Raw, and it's so weird to me, and I don't understand why, but every single hour always has that credit. That credit as the show is ending and the new show is beginning. I understand why that began, when Raw and Warzone were quote-unquote separate shows in the early 90s, but it's strange to think that that is still something on to this day. If you watch Monday Night Raw, when it hits 9 o'clock, that credit comes up as if, this show is over and this is a new show coming up. And you don't see that on SmackDown. SmackDown's a 2-hour show. SmackDown starts, the credit comes up at 10 o'clock.
Interesting. That's very interesting.
It's weird that they've kept up that this entire time, that at the end of each hour of Raw, they essentially put a credit up on the screen as if to say the show is over and a new show is beginning. I always found that very strange because, still happening
I wonder
to this
also
day.
too, like, will they put, like, assuming they go in a direction where they do the first 2 hours of PG and they do like the third hour for TV 14, would they put some sort of graphic up that says, parental guidance? They'll put some sort of, this is for audiences. We don't recommend it under 14.
And
something like
guess
that.
this all relates to whatever it is they're going to be taking the show in that direction of TV 14. What does this essentially mean? Are we gonna turn on Raw this week and it's gonna feel any different? I mean, it's got a lot of us curiously going to be tuning in for that fact. But I'm just wondering, at the end of the day, maybe you said that maybe just the marijuana references, maybe they don't even really change. Maybe what they were saying they considered TV 14 before, so maybe they're just catching up. Maybe they're just going to start late. Because I feel like when it went from TV 14 to TV PG, I feel like you could probably say the product was TV PG before. They were just readjusting the rating. So maybe with the Matt Riddle stuff, they're just readjusting the rating to fit what they already kind of want to be going, the directions they already want to be going.
And I will say, too, in recent episodes, like Street Profits, for example, I think John Cena, with the John Cena episode recently, he sniffed a cup of Tez. And I'm like, he's like, ooh. Kind of like making it, maybe it's a reference of booze, for example. So maybe they do something with, I'm kind of fantasy booking it. I mean, maybe they do some sort of segment where, we want the smoke with Matt Riddle, doing, I know they've done it a little bit, but maybe they really put it out there more and make it kind of like a new shtick, so to speak. I mean, that would be interesting. I feel like they're going to say more cuss words too.
One kind of bow to put on this, and we were talking, obviously, started that Cody Rhodes was part of 2008.
Yes.
There's a lot of rumors going around that he, obviously not currently as part of Monday Night Raw due to injury, but could have had some sort of part in this. What do you feel about that? Do you feel there's any sort of rumors or, are those true, or do you think that he has as much pull as that in the back to change a 14-year status quo?
I mean, I wouldn't put it past Cody Rhodes in WWE. I mean, he did sign a really lucrative contract, and he also was one of the figureheads for AEW in the beginning. So maybe, obviously WWE and Vince and the whole team there, they've probably picked his brain so much on how they were doing things in AEW and like what they've noticed has worked. Maybe that's why maybe that's why TV 14 is happening, because they're seeing the success that AEW is having where they're catering a little bit more to an older audience. So Cody Rhodes said, this is probably what works. This is what doesn't work. And they probably try to find. They're not going to try. I don't think WWE is going to try to give AEW credit by copying it, so to speak, or copying certain things. They're going to. I bet you WWE takes what AEW has done. Maybe they do a little bit of a spin to it and make it work that way. So for sure, I think Cody. I don't think he said, Vince, you have to do this, or Khan, hey, you got to do this, and they do it. But I believe they asked him and said, hey, in your experiences with AEW the last few years, what have you seen as challenges? What do you think has worked? What do you think hasn't worked? I definitely believe those conversations happen.
It'd be really wild, and not in a good way. I'm not suggesting this at all. And I'm kind of thinking that a normal, sane person would probably go the opposite direction because of this and probably keep the product TV PG. But what if this is all just a big ruse so that Vince McMahon and his current allegations and everything going on with Vince McMahon can now be public and on the screen, instead of Vince McMahon coming out and being like, hey, why is that guy coming out on a TV PG product? That's kind of like, doesn't really fit the mold of what he's trying to portray. What if he comes out and it's back to like the Kiss My Ass Club and the whole everything you've heard about me is true, and he kind of like takes that McMahon character and puts it on TV? It'd be very cringe.
He cranks that volume up.
It'd be very cringe. I wouldn't suggest it. I just got done watching that whole Robert Durst thing about, how he was, one of those kind of people who's like doing all these interviews despite the fact that he's clearly guilty of murdering people and catching himself up in things in which most lawyers would say, shut up. And there's a lot of celebrities out there which most lawyers say, shut up, don't say that. But Vince McMahon is kind of that person. I don't know if you noticed, but when this all came out a couple weeks ago, what was the first thing he did? Show up and come right into the ring after not being in the ring and having no real reason to be in the ring.
Both shows, no less.
He comes out when he has essentially pie on his face and decides, I think this would be a good time for me to come out in front of the camera and kind of like pretty much essentially flip off the world, and then I'm going to do what I want.
It's Vince, so you can't put it past
I wouldn't
him.
be surprised if he used this to be super cringe and do something that I wouldn't suggest, but to just be like, I can do whatever I want, and anyone who says that I should scale it back, I'm going to do the opposite.
It's Vince. Vince does what the hell he wants anyways.
It's
just
Vince.
how he is.
Monday Night Raw this week, we will see what TV 14, at least for week 1, entails.